Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us here for another episode. As always, wherever in the world you're listening to us from, whatever platform you're listening to us on, I sincerely appreciate all of the support, all of the messages, all the emails, tweets, things you've sent personally in the show's way. And I can't thank you enough for tuning in and for continuing to support our show 4 years in. As I just mentioned to my guests before we start recording, I've actually had a few of you reach out to me who come from an environment when you're in a small school situation or a rural environment or one that maybe doesn't have big city exposure, big city resources. And a couple of you have asked about, hey, what could I do to, build something special here? What can I do to have a winning environment, a big time program feel to have success maybe in this environment where, we don't have, a lot of people or don't have a lot of athletes to choose from, or it's just more of a small rural type feel. And so I'm really excited to be able to bring this one to you with my guest here to talk about what it means to build a competitive team at a small school, what it means to be successful at a small school, how success can be defined, how to build something that's really large, really big, big time basketball, big time program environment, even if it is in a small school setting. So very happy to be getting this topic with you, and very happy to have my guest here joining me to discuss this topic. My guest today, very successful coach, multiple time state champion coach. He is currently head boys basketball coach out at Yuma High School. So happy to be joined by Coach Dave Sheffield today. Coach, again, really appreciate you being able to come on here and talk to us today. How are we doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Coach, let's get into your basketball journey and your coaching journey. Let's talk about where is this great game of basketball taken you, and where is your coaching journey taken you, and ultimately what has led you to Yuma High School?
Yeah, well, growing up, played all sports, but basketball was kind of the thing that I gravitated to. I had some really influential coaches, and Coach Hart and Coach Cornwell as I was going through school. But realistically, I had a pretty modest, I'll say, playing career, and it ended in high school. But I still really loved the game. I went off to college. Obviously didn't play, and I got my first coaching, I guess, job just as a rec coach in Moscow, Idaho, when I was going to the University of Idaho. And then the next year, or that same year after that was done, I was able to get on with Coach Dudley. He was the coach at Moscow High, and he ran his program from seniors to junior high. And then I was able to get in with him in the junior high program, and was able to see how he ran his whole program, because he allowed you to be a part of everything, varsity practices, everything. So it was pretty cool to see it from that I guess angle, as just kind of a new person trying to get into coaching. So that was a really good experience, and I learned a lot from him. And then from there, it was towards my junior senior year at the University of Idaho, and I went off student teaching. And one of the coaches that was at our high school was around there up in Colville, Washington, and he invited me to come up and stay with him while I was student teaching, and I was able to be on his bench and see how he developed his program. And that was, for a young coach, that was as beneficial as you could get. From there, I took a teaching job, and my first teaching job, I was a little bit later. I was around 27 years old. So I got into it late, but I took my first job at a very small school. I was an assistant for a year, so I was able to see a head coach run his program and how he organized practices and prepped for games and all of that, and that was beneficial. And in my second year, I was elevator. I got the job as the head coach at Hugo. I was only there a year, but it was really a stroke of luck. And by small, you guys are talking about small schools. These are really small schools right now. I moved to High Plains High School in Seabrook, Colorado, and our enrollment in the high school is 45 kids on average.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it was very, very small. I was looking for a basketball job, went into the interview, and when I left, I was the head basketball coach for both junior high and high school, but I was also the head football coach for a 6-man program, and I
Oh,
did not
wow.
know really anything about it.
Wow.
It was a this is what you're also going to do type thing. So then I was the head coach for junior high football and basketball, and head coach for high school and junior high basketball. Um, Football, it was a tremendous journey. I didn't really know what I was doing first year. We ended up like 4-4 something, and just kind of making strides and wandering through it a little bit. Um, People come through your lives are really influential, and one of those guys was Jay Bancroft for me. He ended up being my assistant coach in football, and he was my assistant for 5-6 years, and we built that program up, and the football journey was pretty significant for me. That was our first state championship. It was the first at High Plains, and in our third year we went from 4-4 to our third year where we won state, which was pretty significant. It was a pretty incredible journey getting to see a group of young kids develop into something more, and the whole unified vision and all of that. Um, so that's kind of where the successful part of everything started. And throughout I was at High Plains for 12 years, and 11 of those years we were in the playoffs. We are in the championship game 4 times and won it twice, and then the Final Four a few times and dot dot dot. And but that really got going. But what this guy Jay Bancroft, he was a farmer down in Siebert, and it was by chance that we got connected to coach. But we went to a film session in his first year, and he came to my house. He was like, "All right, I've already watched 5 hours of this, and I've watched this, and I've not watched this." And I kind of just sat back and said, "You know what? I'm just not doing enough," because I hadn't gotten to that depth at all. So that moment was a pretty big moment for me just on the football side,
Yeah.
you know. And we win state that year, which was huge for the school, the community, the whole thing, being the first time ever to do it. And a week later, you're starting your basketball journey, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
so in basketball, our first 3 years were just really mediocre. We got to districts, above 500, hadn't really developed a full summer system, and this was in about 2003 2004. So we hadn't really gotten everything going there yet. Probably my third season there, the same year we won football. That summer kind of turned a little bit, and we started getting a lot more summer activity in the weight room, plus in going taking kids to summer camps and going and doing other things like that. And we had tremendous parent support, you
Hmm.
know um but the teams you're looking at, like that championship football team that we had 13 kids on it, so you're dealing with a small amount of kids.
Yeah.
Basketball, you're looking at 12, 13, 14. We had upwards of 19, I would say. 19 or 20 was probably one of our biggest teams as far as personnel. Um, but after we won football, we still had a mediocre season in basketball.
Hmm.
And the next summer, we had a full summer finally. We were running summer camps where we could take care of kids as, they'd help and earn money to where they could start going to summer camps and stuff to where parents didn't really have to pay much. So involvement increased, I mean, threefold. So we were starting to take kids to university camps and whatnot. And by the fourth year, um, we went from a 500 team or so. Um, we lost in the state championship of football in our fourth year of football. So that's going into my fourth year of basketball. And we implemented some things, and it just had an incredible group of guys, and we went undefeated in basketball. So it started to have this run of just great success. And as everyone knows, success breeds success.
Yeah.
And so from there, we were having this great run in football, and in basketball. We went in our fourth season, we won it. In our fifth season, we were runners up. In the sixth season, we won it. And we just 7 out of those 9 years, of my last 9 years at High Plains, we were at state. And it was a full year deal with these kids, because everyone that played football pretty much played basketball
Play
as well.
basketball. Yeah.
Yeah. So we went through a bunch of success of getting deep into state, winning state, and that's the biggest thing for, when once kids start to win, you don't really want to lose that. And these kids didn't. We did. We just had I got there at the right time because we had a
Hmm.
great group of kids, great athletes, and great parent support. What it ended up, after those three state championships in a row with 2 wins, um, we kept trudging through state, getting consolation champions and which not whatever. And in our 12th year, my last year at High Plains, we were able to we almost doubled up. We were in the championship in football, and we lost that game really close, by 4 points in the 6-man game. If you know anything about 6-man football, 4 points is in any football game, but points are scored pretty quickly in 6-man
Hmm.
football. Um, and so we lost that, and then those guys put together a run, and you're talking about numbers. We had 9 kids on my last team at High Plains.
Oh, that's incredible.
We had the right 9 kids. We played
Did
it
you?
in
Yeah.
rotation, and they were able to win state, and kind of capped off my High Plains career. But it was, when you're dealing with numbers like that, you're hoping to have the right parental support, and you're hoping to have the right kids inside the pipeline to that are going to go in and work in the summers, and I was very lucky to have that. you know
That's wow. Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting that, you think about just for me hearing you just the buy-in, right? That even if you didn't have like the numbers and they weren't like a super high, like the group that you had, I can just tell by the way that you're explaining it, and I'm sure we'll get into it further, seem to be completely bought in and completely work together, completely work to their fullest potential. And even though there wasn't a huge number of them, the ones that you had, like you said, they're the right guys who were completely bought into what needed to be done to be successful.
Definitely. It was so fun to coach down there. It was like a little island, set out in the middle of nowhere, and it was
Is
it
it?
was just a really great situation.
Uh, yeah, that's fantastic, Coach. I'm sure we'll be circling back to that situation here in a little bit, but I do wanna ask you about a topic that I know that you have some passion for, which is player development. I want to ask you about. I know as coaches we're all passionate about probably all levels of player development, but I wanted to pick your brain on maybe a certain particular aspect of player development that you feel particularly passionate for, and what is that aspect, and how do you go about kind of teaching and training players in that aspect?
For us, I mean, you look at our offensive system pretty much,
Hmm.
and that's where we look at all of our hit points as far as our individual workouts and everything. And it all comes down to ball handling, blow by moves, finishing moves, back to the basket ISO work, and just like volume shooting. You need to have shooters. So every time we do workouts 4 mornings a week. We do 45 minutes of workout, and then 45 minutes of weights. And in that 45 minutes, we always try to do some quick twitch ball handling. I saw this, I think it was from Coach Bob Hurley, um, at St. Anthony's, and it's just seven cones in a row, about a foot and a half apart, and it's all about interchanges and quickness with interchanges. But you just get 3 interchanges on one side, pops to the next, 3 interchanges on the next one, and it keeps your hips low and all that. So we do a lot of that type of stuff with our ball handling to make everything quick and everything explosive. Um, our blow by move stuff, we have a drift series and hesitation series, you know, as guards, and we want our post to be, I mean, ideally, if you could have your post to where he could handle the ball efficiently, to me, you're unpressable, you know. Um, and we've had that multiple times at High Plains and at Yuma, to where once pressure gets pretty high, we can just stress relief and get it to our big, and he's good enough to bring it down the floor and do much more after that. Finishing moves, we look at the primary three, which is a pro hop, spin, and euro. You know, back to the basket stuff. We drop steps, jump hooks, um, crab dribbles. To various finishings through there. And then we do a lot of volume shooting. We have a couple shootaways, and we try to get as much shooting in as we can every summer.
I want to pick your brain a little bit about the last part that you meant about shooting. What what in your opinion goes into creating good shooters who can train in a way that's going to translate to what they're going to be doing in a game? What do you kind of do to make sure that your guys are getting up, game-like shots and shooting at, a game-like pace that translates to what they'll be doing in a game situation?
I think the very first element is just being able to shoot. I mean, the game, getting your feet quick and getting your hands quick, ball in the air, feet in the air, and all that. I think that's down the road a little bit. I mean, we work a lot with just single hand under the basket shooting, just to get things going. And then our layers are pretty much, and I know it's not the analytics go against it, but we work a lot with 15 footers and then moving back to threes. So we work those three levels. But I don't think there's a really huge magic thing with shooting. Every
Hmm.
shooter that I've had that could shoot practices a lot, shoots a lot. You can work
Yeah.
on where you can work on getting your elbow to a 90 and you can work on this and you can work on this. But if you just do that in the season, you're not going to be a very good shooter. Kids that I've had that can shoot, just they shoot a lot. And I've had various kids with different forms, and we're looking at, well, we should change this. We should have him look into this, getting his elbow to this. And kids that shoot a lot usually are pretty good shooters. So to me, it's just getting them through the threshold of the doors to get in the gym.
Yeah.
Your kids that have a decent form but don't shoot a lot aren't really good shooters. So just getting them in the gym and getting consistent reps throughout the year, I think that's the I think that's the magic thing to make a good shooter.
It's funny that you brought that up because as you're explaining that, I'm thinking of a girl that I had a few years ago who just the way her elbow was positioned when she shot it just drove me crazy because it went against everything that I thought about, how a shooter should be lined up, how their elbows should be lined up and everything. But she put up tons of shots all the time and she shot pretty successfully in games. And, I reached to a point and the coaches and the coaching staff just reached to a point of just like, you know what? We're just going to leave it alone. It doesn't look the best. It's not the most aesthetically pleasing or visually pleasing, but she puts in enough work on that form and in the way that she shoots it, and she's putting the reps in that, it works for her. And maybe it doesn't work for 98, 99% other players that we want to train as shooters, but it does for her. So we'll just let it go and leave it be, sort of thing. I think you're absolutely
I
right.
agree.
Hmm.
You look at Reggie Miller, how he finished his shot, one of the better shooters in the NBA, and his hand was pulling across his other hand. I mean, it's just a lot of reps.
Yeah, that muscle memory, once it's locked in and you get the reps in and you know how to make it work, it's pretty powerful in that when that happens for sure.
It
Um,
is.
so one of the big questions, Coach, I get asked from listeners who are in small school environments, low population environments, is how do I build a team? How do I build a program when there's low enrollment, when the school has really low enrollment, and there maybe even less athletes and less players coming in? How does that happen? So I want to ask you, how did you maintain a program that was healthy, a program that was healthy, that had numbers? I know you kind of mentioned some of the numbers are kind of small, but in general, how do you get a team that's competitive even if the numbers itself aren't necessarily high or the population isn't that high?
It excuse me. In Colorado right now we have 1A through 6A. And I've coached at 1A, 2, and 3A, and I am not an A's guy at all. So I think the biggest thing is no matter where you're at, make it big, you know. And it started at High Plains. We're doing the same thing at Yuma, um, but allow them all the chances that anyone else would get, you know. At High Plains, we went to University of New Mexico, we went to Oklahoma State for team camps, and we were able to do it through our. I mean, we do fundraisers to where it was accessible to all these kids. At Yuma right now, we have more kids than I had at High Plains, but they're able to go on a very, very minimal budget. And to me, it's making it as big as you possibly can. I don't think you're ever well, we're just 1A or we're just 3A or we're this. If you take that mentality, you're just going to be that, so putting your foot forward and just being as big as you possibly can be is the deal. I mean, this is if we're at 3A, this is their season just like it is for any kid at 6A. So I think that's one of the biggest elements is to make your expectations and your standards huge. Do everything you possibly can, allow them those opportunities.
what are the expectations that you had in your previous positions, and have those maintained at Yuma? What would you say those expectations are?
You know, as far as expectations,
Hmm.
we look at various things, and winning's it's hard to say anymore, but winning is a big deal on things, and I'm going to use this past year's team. We lost nine kids off of our team.
Yeah.
Um, we had one part-time starter coming back, one senior who barely played on JV the year before and finished on C. Another kid that started halftime on JV. Dot 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 dot. It's just a crazy thing. Our six man was played on the B squad in junior high the year before. You know, your expectation is to come in, work your tail off, do it the right way, and all things go forward. You're going to have success. So I don't ever use a rebuild as a we could have easily been rebuilding this year. We could have.
Sure.
But last summer, I mean, kids started talking. We could be doing this. We could be doing this. They started talking about winning state last year. You know, even after losing all those kids, so your expectation should be win state. I mean, I don't know. I hear a lot of coaches say, "Well, we're just going to be probably around 500 this year." Guess where you're going to be? You're
You
going to be
set
around
that
500.
expectation to just
Yeah,
be 500. Yeah.
you're just going to be 500. So, so no, I think just make it as big as you can be and push those expectations. I mean, realistically, and it's coaching's a tough deal. I mean, you get hit from various angles, but if you set expectations high and don't meet them, that's just gonna fall on your shoulders. You fell short. If you set expectations low and meet them, that's probably also on you. You know, so I'd rather not hit the high expectation than reach the low expectation.
So when you were talking about your guys were kind of building that excitement, they were setting those high expectations for themselves. Was that something that you had to kind of cultivate or bring out with them, or is that something that they just kind of had internally and they already had that belief and you were just kind of encouraging or kind of feeding that belief that they already had?
Well, the process at Yuma has been it was kind of like High Plains. Our first year we got the Sweet 16, which was good first year. Then we were 4-16 the next year. We graduated everyone. Then we were 8-12. And then the following year we were like 24-2 and state champions. The following year we were 25-2 and state champions. The next year the season ended in COVID. The next year we had a COVID issue and we still were in the Final Four. Then we won state. Then we moved up to 3A from 2A and we got to state. So I mean, all these teams previous built the expectations, you know, and then it's just, I mean, once winning gets into a culture, I mean,
Hmm.
it just breeds itself. We had a couple kids that were on our 22 state championship team, so they'd been around it. So they kind of know the expectation is to go out and excel.
Yeah, yeah, and as you mentioned, right, when that expectation is kind of built off of previous success, right? There is that idea of like we have been successful. I've seen personal success, right? The players could be thinking the team seen team success, so they know what it takes to be there, and they kind of have that expectation that they're not willing to kind of settle for 500 as you mentioned, or just say we're just going to be a 500 level team. So no, I totally get that. Um, your players that you have right now, are these players who because I'm thinking specifically in a small school environment, how important it is for these players to be kind of almost like a group that started really young and they've stuck together and then they kind of work for elementary school, middle school, high school. Is that kind of the situation that you've had at High Plains and at Yuma? Are these groups that have basically been a unit ever since they were little and been playing since they were little?
To a large degree, yes. Like my last year at High Plains, that group had a couple kids move in 8th grade freshman year, but pretty much. At Yuma, yeah, these kids have overall they've played since their small leagues in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. My son's a sophomore going junior. He's a junior now, and his team they've been playing since 1st grade together. So there is that chemistry and cohesion and whatnot that balls them up.
So as a coach in a small school, kind of a rural environment, then I imagine how important in particular it is to make sure that the youth program is doing well, that the youth camps are being run the way that they need to be run, that there's kind of that pipeline that's being built from what they're doing in the youth system, so that by the time they get to high school, obviously not only have they been playing with each other and have chemistry that way, but they also kind of have an idea as to what they're going to be expected to do at the high school level, and what it is that they're going to be maybe running, maybe potentially offensively and defensively. So I kind of want to pick your brain a little bit about what you do, or what you've done, or what advice you would give for a coach to kind of make sure that youth program and that youth pipeline is being constructed and built and coached the correct way.
Um, I mean, the youth program, obviously, it is vital. At Yuma, we have a great situation. We have a Hoopsters organization. We run a 3-on-3 tournament that generates a lot of funds and have a couple other things, and that allows most of our youth fees to be paid for. So,
Mm.
which increases participation. As far as the youth, like second through sixth grade, um, I'm available, is what I would say. I'm available, and I'll give advice on we could do this, we could do this. And I coached, my son and daughter from first grade to sixth grade or whatever. In those early ages, having them remember an offense from practice to the game day is it's a pretty tough deal, you know. So the coaches are usually parents, and they're providing an opportunity for kids to just play and love the sport, in a competitive nature. And I'll give advice if they ever ask or whatever. But are they running what we're running at the high school and everything? No, they're not. They're getting movement, they're finding space, learning defensive concepts. Just they're learning basketball and they're playing basketball, which I think is huge, and they get to play. And these programs like this year, I think our second through eighth graders in our travel ball, every team won their little championship except for the seventh grade, and that was because they were in the eighth graders division. Um, but it's primarily parents that are running it, and they keep the program going. Once it gets to the junior high um, teams, I coached it for a couple years, and right now we have a guy who used to be on our high school staff and two of my former players running it. So they're my junior high
Well,
coaches. And
probably a lot
so
of trust
they're
there then, for sure.
a lot, yes. And so they're once they get to the junior high level, they're getting the verbiage, they're running our offenses, running our defenses, um, pretty much starting to implement our playbook once they get to seventh grade. So I think
Mm.
that's huge. I've had it before where they get to, freshman year and they don't have a clue what we're doing at the high school. And that's, I believe, a lot in the summers. And when you have that, you have dead summers because you're just trying to get them to where they understand what we're doing. So the freshmen are kind of behind a little bit. Right now they know how we call stuff, they know all the verbiage, they know all the terminology, and it's a really easy step for them to make um to get into the program.
Yeah, no, that's it sounds like the kind of pipeline and kind of the trajectory is you get them in when they're young, and you're building kind of that excitement for basketball. You're building kind of the fun aspect, and really getting them to fall in love with the game. And then as they kind of progress to that middle school level and they're still playing, then that's when you kind of start working in the language, working in the offense, and working in the defense. So it's kind of like building that love, building then as they start to fall in love with the game, building in the more X's and O's. And then by the time they come to high school, they got the X's O's mentality. They're in love with the game, and they're ready to hit the ground running.
Yeah, that's pretty
Awesome.
much how we have things going. And I give our youth coaches our varsity playbook, and they can poach whatever, it's not poach, but use whatever
Yeah.
they want for it. But I mean, how far that goes at the youth levels, I think it's probably pretty minimal.
Yeah. Uh, you mentioned about parents, and I think this is an important thing that to bring up. And I was looking for an opportunity to bring it up, and I will now, about how important it is for you as a coach to have those strong connections and those strong bonds with parents, especially in a rural environment, a small school where everybody knows each other and you're very visible, I imagine, in a small town. So talk about what has gone into you building that positive relationship with parents, getting them bought into the program, working with parents in order for your player and their kid to be successful.
I think it's kind of an equal opportunity thing. You know, when I first got here, we didn't have everything going. So there were some kids that couldn't afford like going to summer to all of the summer stuff, and right now it's to a point where with I mean our kids run it with me. We run a big team camp. I run a youth camp. Um, to where we can give opportunities to every kid. It doesn't matter what family you come from. If you want to play basketball, there's an opportunity for you to get better at any level. So I think that's one of the things they see us reaching out to every kid. And I think that creates trust. I mean, we're pretty straightforward and honest with parents, and sometimes it turns out well, sometimes it doesn't, and and I think that's what gets people on board.
Yeah, the idea I think with parents too, and I know this is I'm in a big city environment, and yours is in a much different environment than I am, but I think the big thing that I've seen, and I imagine it has to be true of parents no matter what, is that trust, and that trust in you, and that trust that you have their son or their daughter in my case is best interest in mind, and that they know that you are open, that you're visible, that you are willing to have, honest conversations about, their son or daughter, willing to be frank about everything. And at least I've found that, a lot of the most successful coaches that I know when it comes to those relationships is just their openness and their transparency. And I imagine that, no matter where it is that you're coaching, that's super important. But I imagine in that small environment, in that small rural environment, when you are so visible as a coach, that's probably maybe even two, four, five, 10 times as important that you are that honest and transparent.
It is, and there's times that I've failed at it, and there's times that it's worked well, and I think that goes along with it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that trial and error, definitely for sure. What are some things that you have done that kind of go maybe outside of basketball and outside of the basketball court that have kind of built the excitement of the program? You talked about, your program having that big time feel, those big time expectations. So, in a small or more rural environment where, sports, high school sports, as you know, it's really big, it's a really big deal, and then the players are almost seen as big celebrities in the town and everything. What do you do with your program to get them visible and get them out there and building excitement for the program that maybe isn't just on the the court itself, but more community involvement or in the neighborhood?
There's through the various clubs and groups that we have. I mean, like our boosters club, we do stuff at the fair with serving. Serve burgers and stuff. We do something for our at the parade that allows them to be visible. The three on three tournament that we're doing right now, that allows a lot of visibility. It's a great fundraiser, but it puts our kids out there. They're refing and keeping score, and they're on the courts and doing things like that. So there's those opportunities for them to get out, and it puts them out in front of the community more.
No, yeah, that's great. That building of, I imagine the building of them as people, right? The building of them as adults or young men is I'm sure also just as much important to you as what they are as basketball courts or basketball players, but building them as well-rounded individuals sounds like something that's also a focus for you in your program.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest part of sports, is getting us to the next stage in life.
So one of the things that I know some listeners who ask about, who also are in situations where they have small schools, low population, is many of their players are multi-sport athletes. And I know that's something that you alluded to before. And one of the concerns I had one particular listener talk about was like, how do I, build, these basketball players and make sure that we're a successful program when my players are busy. They're doing multiple sports, they're doing all these other things, and they don't have the time to do something year round because they're multi-sport athletes, or they're doing other things. And so you've been in that situation, coach. So I want to ask you about how you're able to continually to build successful programs and successful players, knowing that you're sharing athletes and knowing that your players are playing all these multiple sports and doing multiple things.
Um, Competing and playing in other sports builds every other sport realistically, and sometimes it draws down, and your athlete goes into, I'm just playing football, or I'm just
Hmm.
playing basketball, or I'm just playing baseball, or whichever. But like at our school, throughout the school year, when a kid's in that sport, every other coach is pretty much hands off and allows them to just go through the full experience. There's some that still work on their, I guess, their primary sports. Um, but overall, we're kind of hands off. When it gets to the summer, then kids are getting hit in various spots. I mean, for us this year, we've had very few times where I've had my full team, because we have kids playing baseball, we have kids going doing this, kids working. Um, it's doing everything you possibly can with what you have. And allowing, I mean, it's the kids' journey. We're just allowed to be a part of it, so it's making sure that they have the best experience they can. Some streamline what they're doing, some don't. And
Hmm.
all of those lines are fine. They're good. So it's once you get them, once it gets to, if they're playing football, once football's over, then you do everything you can with them then, you know. Um, and it's the same with when they're done going to the next sport, allow them to have that journey, and that still builds on what you're going to be doing. To me, competing is competing. You're going to be getting
Hmm.
better in basketball by doing other things, and the same thing if you're choosing to do other sports.
And to follow up on that, because that's something that you mentioned, which I thought was a really important point. How important is it for you as a coach to have strong relationships with the other coaches at your school who coach other sports, knowing that you're sharing athletes, knowing that they're going to be doing their all in one sport and then come to you and then go to something else? How important is it to have that open communication, have a good relationship, be able to work with the other coaches that are coaching other sports at your school?
I think it's very important that everyone can see the whole process. And I've had kids that don't go out because they're going to focus on this, and other coaches have had kids that don't go out for that because they're going to focus on this. And it's a tough deal because a small school, you only have so many athletes,
Yeah.
you know, and it's a really tough deal, But I'm going to go back to, it's the kids' journey, and they need to be able to fulfill what they want. So like I said, we're just a part of that journey. And as coaches, we realistically, we just need to realize that, and everyone works together, and it's a good situation.
Yeah, yeah, and to your point, right? The idea that like being, honest and open, like we've kind of talked about before, about have making sure that players feel they can have those conversations with you, and you can have those conversations with coaches, and be open about what's happening, about if players decide to do one sport, or they drop another sport, or if players are torn between what it is that they want to do, the fact that they feel that they can talk to those coaches, and they also know, and I think this is something I could get the sense from hearing you talk, is that the players also, I bet, know that the coaches are on the same page and that they can't, pit coaches against one another. Or they can't, have any idea like, oh, this coach doesn't like this coach, and, this might sway my decision. I get the sense that the players know that the coaches are kind of unified in wanting what's best for the players. And I think that also creates a lot of health and positivity for a program.
Right, for sure.
I wanted to talk a little bit, just basketball play style with you, coach. And I don't know if it's really makes a difference whether it's at a small school or a rural school, and or a bigger school. So I'll let you kind of answer it. But from your experience and being at High Plains, being at Yuma, is there a certain style of basketball or a certain pace of basketball or a certain way of playing basketball that you think is more beneficial or just kind of works better in a small school environment? Or do you think it doesn't really matter regardless? Any small school, big school, rural school can kind of run, what it is that we run, and or what it is you run rather, and still be successful.
No, I think you fit everything towards your towards your team. I mean, you're going to have different personnel every year. You know, I had not been a press coach for the first 19 years of my career. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we were more of a half court team and then pushed the pace in transition. And it was in like 2021 or 20, I think it was 2021 or whichever. We started out 0-3. Um, the three losses were to pretty solid teams, but we were pretty uninspired. And we switched things in 2 days to become a press and run and overly fast team and overly this and this and this. And it was the COVID shortened year. We only had 13 games. We lost our first three, and then we won our next nine. Um, and then I've switched what we're doing like 3 times in the last 4 years
Have you?
because our personnel, I mean, our basis is pretty much the
Mm-hmm.
same, but how we attack things and do things is much different. I mean, we went last year, we were pressing. This year, I didn't have the personnel to press, so we went completely quarter court or a little bit more quarter court to half court. Um, and that, I mean, if we'd have kept on pressing, we wouldn't have got what we wouldn't have accomplished what we did this year. So I think it's adjusting. You know, there's so many different styles out there. It's looking at the personnel on your bench and finding the formula that makes that work together. You know, your system plus your plus your personnel. If you just do this, I do this. I'm a man-to-man coach. I'm a this coach. I'm a that coach. You're possibly going to miss something.
And I think that to that point, I completely agree. I think to that point, in a environment where you have kind of low numbers, or you have small school environment, you see the players kind of coming up for your system from the youth system to the middle school system to the high school system. It could potentially be almost a trap that a coach could fall into, where they kind of box their players into a certain play style, or anticipate that they're going to be a certain skill set, or have a certain strength or advantage, and kind of try and box them into that, versus, as you mentioned, finding what works, and understanding that players are going to develop year to year, and team chemistry and team makeup is going to be a little bit different, and to maybe not, make predictions or assumptions about what you think a player is going to be like coming into your system, and just kind of let things play out and see who it is that you got, and kind of build and adjust from there.
Right. And that's a lot of what we're doing right now. I mean, we do kind of see down the road. I mean, we just don't have, I used to have a lot of size. I mean, we had a team that was, our center was 6'8", our point guard was 6'4", our off guard was 6'3". I mean, we were
Hmm.
huge. You know, kid coming off the bench at 6'5", and now our tallest player is 6'3", and he was
Well,
six
that's an
three last year.
adjustment. Yeah.
You know, but we still our base defense is still the same, but our mode of operating has changed a little bit. I mean, it went from pressing to now we're pushing, but quarter court defense, and we do kind of see down the road though, because we don't have size coming up at all, but we're going to have a lot more of these kids, to where I anticipate going back to pressing, you know, just by the kids that we have coming up and what we see as their strengths right now. But it could be
Yeah.
a quick change once we see stuff in the summer and whatever. But I think it's fitting your players to the right system per year.
And I know you alluded to this, and did talk about this, but I wanted to kind of pick your brain philosophically about where do you kind of make that distinction, or kind of draw that line as a coach, between this particular system that we're going to do, whether it's like we're going to be a pressing team, it works, but they're just not there yet, but I know they're going to get there, versus we need to pivot into something else because their skill set isn't matching what it means to be successful with this. How do you kind of make that delineation between they're not there yet versus we gotta go and do something differently entirely and try something else?
Well, we're in that dilemma kind of,
Hmm.
because last year and this year we really anticipate doing this because we're not doing what we did this past year the same this year because of the depth of what we have. In 2 years, we're anticipating higher numbers, a little bit more maturity, on our young players, to where we're going to be able to push out more of our pressing system. So right now, like during the season, we're almost running two systems in preparation of the future. So our varsity stuff, we're more half court, getting into our transition, where at our lower levels, we're already installing the press and moving them, because that has been their strength through junior high and getting into the high school set. And there's a lot of numbers that we're gonna be able to interchange a lot of pieces without losing anything. Right now, if we interchange all those pieces, the risk reward isn't high enough.
Yeah, and I'm in the same dilemma. It's funny that you mentioned that. I'm kind of in the same dilemma with trying to piece together a lot of players and try and figure out, where their particular skill set kind of lies and who fits in well with who. And it's always an interesting philosophical like kind of question about players who have certain skill sets that may benefit them with a certain lineup, but then you trying to rotate these pieces in and out, and all of a sudden that skill set doesn't translate with this other environment and this other group that they're in. And I think that, finding that balance and finding whatever it is that works takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of trial and error involved. But to your point, what you mentioned is that, something I got out of it is like, don't be afraid to make that adjustment in the middle of the season. And it sounds like for you, you have that mindset of like it's fine to make that change, and don't feel that it's too late if it's in the middle of the season to switch up what you're doing if your players have the ability to kind of transition and switch off into something else.
Yeah, I have zero problem saying that I messed up the first part of the season, as long as we get it right towards the end of the season. So I can take that I had him in the wrong system, and that's what we did that first year we switched to pressing. We came out and no one had seen us press ever, and we were going from scoring like 48 to 52. That first game we scored 94. Um, and it was just a completely different brand, and that was 3 days later from the previous game. And I had him in the wrong system. I was doing the wrong thing, and I'm okay wearing that. But if I'd be worse if I wasn't okay wearing that, and kept him
Trying to be
in
too
a
stubborn.
situation that wasn't working.
Yeah, yeah, and that goes to you talked about the openness and the transparency that you have with your players, and that you as a coach can own up to, saying that, hey, this one's on me, it doesn't work, but it's time to switch off to this, and let's go into this and see what happens. And the fact that your players were like, yeah, let's go on to this, and let's go and not miss a beat, I think speaks a lot to, that culture of them wanting to be successful, that they could probably tell that, hey, maybe this isn't what's working for us right now, but we're going to try something else new, because ultimately we want to be successful and we want to be competing for championships. So let's not be, stubborn on this, or get upset at a coach for this, or get annoyed about what happened in the past. Let's switch off to this in the future and hit the ground running and buy in on that.
Without a doubt. And I give that team a lot of credit, because they did. We took a tough loss, and that next I called them on the bus ride, because I was on a different bus. The way we do things, and we speaker phoned it, and we said what we were gonna do. And the next day the kids were bought in, they were lively, they were vibrant. It was a really cool situation.
And I want and to follow up with that, for coaches who are going to be in a situation like you, where they have a competitive team, they have a team that's gonna make some noise, they're going to be in the playoffs, they're going to be playing for potentially state championships, big school, large school, small school, what have you. What goes into that as a coach to keep your team kind of focused, one game at a time, one practice at a time, focusing on the small goals and the small things ahead, versus looking too far into the future and worrying about things that aren't coming up right away? How do you kind of keep your team kind of going and focused in that grind, and making sure that they're winning each practice and being successful each day?
It's always just the next opponent. I mean, they're the most significant that's the most significant game every year, is just your next one, right? So it's just focusing on that. It's not looking to, I mean, you can't get to point C if you don't get through A and B. So it's just focusing on that week, making sure your practice plans are developed. You're going into practices with urgency. You have scouting reps for pretty much every game. I mean, there's some that that this game's just going to be what it is, but you still give some emphasis to it on what you're gonna be running. And it's every single weekend, because I've lost some games we shouldn't have lost, and everyone has those upset stories. So it's just building against that, to where that next game is just the most important game.
with that, because I completely agree, right? You got to have a short-term memory. You have to have a short-term memory. You got to be able to put the past behind you, and you got to be able to focus on what's coming up next for your programs that have been at the pinnacle, who have seen the success, who have seen those state championships. What did those teams, what did they have in common? And I ask this so that coaches maybe can think to themselves about programs, maybe their program right now, and maybe they're going to have high expectations and they're going to be successful, and they have, big plans for where it is that they're going to go this season. What did those teams that reach that championship level, what did they have in common with each other? What attributes did they have? And how did you kind of know as a coach, like, okay, we really do have something special here with this group of guys?
One of the things we say going into every season is each person's greatest task is to make sure that his buddy has an incredible game. And that's what these teams have had. They've had great chemistry. They cared about each other. When you have that, a lot of things just fall into place. They're going to work for each other. They're going to work for you. You're going to work for them. I think that's the biggest intangible is they're okay letting their buddy take the spotlight, you know, and making sure that he has a great night. I our first state championship game. I remember this vivid as anything. It was Kyle Bancroft, and I wanted him to score, and we were at the state tournament. I needed him to score, and I pulled him over, and I'm like, Kyle, we need you to get this going. He's like, no, I don't really need to score tonight. Cody has it. When you have those situations, everything's going to fall into
Wow.
place.
Yeah, I mean, and that, that selflessness, right? As a coach, is that something that you felt that you really had to do a lot to kind of like foster or build up or do things intentionally build that teamwork? Or these just guys that just kind of loved on each other, and you just kind of kept that going, and made sure that kind of stayed strong?
I think it's really hard for a coach to force that in. It has to
Yeah.
be, I mean, that's something that's developed at home with parents. Those are the kids you get in your program, and kids that have just been around each other and care about each other. You get into those situations. We foster it, we surely foster it. I think every coach works to foster that. Um, but it's getting the right kids in because there's kids that won't do that. And you can force it as much as you can, and it's just not going to work. It just doesn't work because it's not the mindset. So you have to have the right kids coming into the building, and they have to buy into the overall vision of what you're doing. But a lot of that's a home based thing.
And to the topic of kind of a small environment, small school environment, to have such great, youth system and parent involvement, where these kids, I'm sure, growing up playing with each other, are friends with each other, and some of them are probably best of friends with each other, and to have, all of these positive influences that help them raise their love of basketball, that have raised their friendships with each other. I'm sure you've been in those situations where they come to you in their high school, and you can just kind of tell that you got kids coming into your program that are really good friends of each other, that have that chemistry with each other, that have that trust and love and that bond with each other. And there's just, as you know, so much that you can do when that side of things has already been taken care of, and you know that you're not going to have as many issues with, selfishness or individuality, people looking out for themselves. Like, you have a group that really is like truly cares for one another and is already bonded.
Yeah, when you have that, I mean, to me, all else follows. You can
Mhm.
you can pretty much throw it out and do whatever you want. I mean, it's a really good situation.
Let me ask you, Coach, before we hit our concluding segment here in a few minutes, because I know I know I always have listeners who kind of find themselves in this situation where they're looking to take a coaching position, and maybe they come from a more urban area like I do, and they're maybe looking at a position that is outside, and they're looking at a rural area, they're looking at a small school environment, and this might be one of their first times being in an environment like that. What advice would you give to a coach who may be looking to go into that environment coaching? What is it that they should know? What is it that they should be aware of if they really want to be successful in that type of setting?
Jump in with both feet. I always think if you as a coach do more than the kids possibly can, they're going to see that you're working for them. And realistically, that's the deal, that we're working for them rather than them working for us. So I would jump in with both feet, bluff sometimes, and just go as hard as you can to make what your vision is possible.
Yeah, it's a great situation, I think, for a coach to not to jump in both feet, like you said, and not be necessarily worried about, like, fitting in. I actually had a question about that. Like, hey, I'm going to take this environment, this environment where there's only 200 people, and I'm a little worried about, being seen as an outsider, being seen as somebody who doesn't really understand what's going on. And my advice to him was like, hey, just jump in and be there and be all involved and all in. And I think that if you do that, it's going to be pretty obvious right away that, you're here for the long haul. You're going to be welcome in the community, that you're doing right by kids. And it's kind of one of those situations of if you can't go halfway in, either all in or all out. So if you're going to want to be there, go be there. And I think that the parents and the community and everybody will kind of see that genuineness kind of reflect off that once you get that position, if that's what you end up doing.
Exactly. I mean, ultimately, I mean, parents just want their kids to be happy and have success
Have
or
a good.
whichever
Hmm.
through their high school journey. I mean, if you work your tail off for that, I mean, it's going to put yourself in a good situation.
Absolutely. All right, Coach. Last question before we hit our concluding segment, because I want to make sure I pick your brain on this. As somebody who has been involved in coaching in state champion games, have been at these high level games, as a coach, what is your advice to listeners who are going to be in that position to make sure that they are mentally prepared as a coach for that kind of setting and that kind of environment, and also for making sure that their players are ready for that sort of game? What have you done to make sure that you as a coach are right and are at the top of your game in those state champion, those high level games, and also making sure that your players are ready and that the moment doesn't overwhelm them or isn't too big for them?
It's it starts out in the summer. I mean, that's kind of what you're training for. You know, once you get to me, once you get to states, you've done all your work. The kids have done all their work. Um, if something happens, you can't run them the next day at practice. They're done. You know, so once you get to state, it's just throwing everything out there, and there's a lot of things that have to fall into place for to win at state. Um, so as a coach, obviously you should be preparing every week, and with our coaching staff, we segment stuff. Different coaches have different teams, and they run their primary scouts, and so the team part of everything is prepared, and then once you get there, it's just understanding that you should be there. You know, the first year we got to state at High Plains, I heard so much talk about they can't, when we were undefeated going into state, that they can't win it. This is their first time there. I don't get that. Why? Why shouldn't we win it? You know, it doesn't take trial runs to win state. You go in, you're prepared. Kids work hard. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and there's so many different factors that come into play there. Um, but it's just doing your deal and making the moment shouldn't, if you've done your job throughout the years, the moment shouldn't be too big once you get there.
Yeah, that and like you said, the work that you're doing beforehand, so that if you've been putting yourself in a position to be successful in March and April, it's all the work that you're doing in the off season, all the work that you're doing in June, so that it's as much as you can just another game. Because right, once you get to state, you've done all the work already, and just kind of maintaining and keep doing the things that got you there. So no, I think that's great advice.
Exactly.
Coach, to wrap up, there's a couple of questions that I ask every guest, and I'll go ahead and start with this first one, which is thinking back on your coaching career. And I know there's been a lot of moments in your coaching career, so it may be hard to just pick one, but thinking back on your coaching career, what is a particular moment from your coaching career that you went through that you think by sharing it, our listeners would be able to learn from?
You know, I could pick a couple, but and I've already touched on it, and it was with Jay Bancroft. It was
Hmm.
the point of realization that I'm not doing enough. You know, when he came in and he said, "I've already watched 5 hours of film, and I've already done this." I'd barely touched the film. As a young coach, I wasn't there yet, and that made me realize that. So I'm going to hit that one, and then my other one's just going to be this year.
Okay.
This was a team that individual fingers they shouldn't win the state championship. Um, but they had a belief, and as a collective group, they put things together and worked for each other. We didn't minimize. I think everything's a get what you tolerate situation. You know, if we tolerate being 500, then we're going to be 500. If they tolerated just greatness and doing great things, then they were going to get where they got. You know, so those things. We use the phrase "you get what you tolerate" quite a bit. Um, and those guys didn't tolerate mediocrity. They kept trudging in all phases of the year.
And I think it's amazing to think as a coach that you could just have, you could feel a certain way about your program, and maybe in your mind you're kind of can limit yourself in the way that you kind of look at your program. If you look at it through a certain lens and you say like, oh, we're just going to be 500 or we're just going to be okay. I think as a coach, you end up starting to coach to that level. You end up coaching in a almost a mediocre way, or you kind of coach with less enthusiasm, or coach in a way that's going to, as you kind of think alluded to earlier, you kind of coach a 500 program because you have a 500 level mindset. And so it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy where if your guys believe that you should be successful and you believe that you're going to be successful, you're not going to coach the same way that you would if your mindset is that you're just going to be a 500 level program. And I think that power of, that thought and the power of the what you believe in and how much you believe in your program just goes such a long way into actually the reality of where your program can actually get to.
I think it's absolutely correct. I mean, what you raised to what you put your standards at,
Hmm.
and that's I mean, I think that's the basis of all coaching, is where your standards are going to be put.
Yeah, no, 100%. Those standards, the how high you set those standards is how high your players are going to be able to go and reach them. The higher you set the standard, the higher it is that your players are going to be able to reach. I 100% agree. Coach, to wrap up, I give every guest kind of what I call a 60-second soapbox. You're welcome to go over 60 seconds though, because I'm not going to time you, but I like to use this as a platform for you to kind of get out a final thought, a final idea, a closing message, something to leave the listeners with. You can take it anywhere, basketball coaching or otherwise. It is your soapbox after all. But Coach, I'm going to go ahead and kind of just give you the floor here, and I'm going to kind of let you take it where you want from here.
Well, what I wrote down is we've already touched on so much, um, and that was you get what you tolerate,
Mm.
and we've touched on it so much with this. So
Yeah,
I'm gonna try to use this and pivot. Um,
sure.
inside of coaching, there's so many different things that can happen. But it's what we're gonna tolerate. In the summer a lot, you get a lot of new kids, start putting teams together. I call them palms up teams. We don't accept it, or we don't tolerate it. Um, what the product that we put on the floor, we don't, and sometimes it happens, we don't argue with officials, and we've had some issues with it, but we don't. We're not a palms up team. We're not gonna put all of our energy towards that. I mean, we're just gonna play basketball, and it's as a coach, I think you need to determine what your philosophy is going to be on how your product is going to be on the floor. I've had so many teams, so many times throughout the years that that we win, and sometimes we win big, and people thank us for how the players act on the floor. And ultimately, I think that's the biggest win of the night. We have refs thank us for how our kids are on the floor. So I think going into any coaching season or endeavor, or even starting your career, whichever, I think that's one of the biggest things is how your program wants to be seen outside of your program. Make what your baseline's going to be, and don't tolerate anything outside of that. If you do that, your program's going to speak well of itself.
Yeah, and I really love that you mentioned that point. It's something I've also been really proud of as a coach, even just to slightly brag about, my own program is when other teams who we haven't even played before. We'll say like something like, "Oh, like I know that like your girls like play a certain way and they work really hard and they're really respectful." Like the how powerful that is when your reputation just kind of goes beyond, even where that it goes, and that the way that your team carries itself and the way that they play is respected and recognized by officials, the other team, and then they talk about your team in a positive light, like the effect that that has on your program and the way that your program is seen and the way that your program is treated. I think it's tremendous.
Yeah, I do. That's what we look for. That's what we strive for. It's going to be something beyond. I mean, how you face adversity is kind of the nature of sports, and
Yeah.
and if you don't fight back at everything and you're able to play through stuff, that's going to be the big tell, and it's gonna transcend just the sport,
Yeah.
your
Fantastic.
sporting
Coach,
career.
I really appreciate you being able to come on here and kind of share your story and share the things that go into building a great program at a small school environment, a rural environment, talking a little bit about play style, players, relationships, parents, all this great stuff, transparency that we've hit on a few times. So I really appreciate you. I know you're a busy guy here with a lot going on, but really looking forward to following your journey, coach, and really looking forward to you guys hopefully having another great season and making another deep run. So Coach Sheffield, best of luck. Thank you so much for joining us, and really do appreciate you sharing your time with us.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
And thank you guys so much for listening. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. We will see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.